This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 221 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the NumberFire Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. I don't have anything to intro with this week, but I do want to let you guys know that I won my first game in Apex Legends. So I feel like I'm kind of a big deal now. But we've got some good questions this week, so let's just dig in. This first question is from Twitter from @NorCalHoya. Any examples of recent prospects that you felt the need to discount your model results with? Why? So I followed up and asked NorCalHoya if he meant players my model loved, but I didn't as much, and he said, or vice versa. So basically, who are the recent prospects where I've disagreed with my model most? I mentioned this in the show earlier this week, but the top reason I subjectively change the rankings and will often have a different take than what my model is spitting out is teammate situation. Some running backs and wide receivers are playing with other top-notch running backs and wide receivers. If that's the case, their market share numbers are going to suffer, and they're going to look worse in my model. So just last year, my model didn't like Sony Michel and Nick Chubb as much as it should have, but it made sense as to why that was the case. Even when inputting where those two backs got drafted, they still ranked lower than where they should have within the model. And I not only watched the guys play, I also knew that the reason their numbers were lower was because they were teammates. That's going to hurt their production. So the higher level answer to this is I just look at context for every relevant player in the draft. It could be that a player is really good within a lot of statistics, but then really bad within one or two of them. A good example of this is D'Onta Foreman. In the 2017 draft, my model had Christian McCaffrey as the best back, then Dalvin Cook, then Leonard Fournette, and then Joe Mixon. Aaron Jones was actually 6th on that list post-draft, despite being selected late. That was a key reason I was into Aaron Jones early on. But the player just ahead of Jones within the model was D'Onta Foreman. Foreman was an incredible runner in college, for those of you who don't know. But he also only caught 13 passes in his 3 seasons in college. Since he was such a good runner, though, my model liked him. But I subjectively was worried that he wasn't as good as his numbers indicated. And then I'll weigh landing spot pretty heavily, too. The model doesn't look at whether going to the Saints is better than going to the Jets. It looks at draft equity. But when we know the Saints have consistently been one of the highest scoring offenses for running backs under Sean Payton, when Alvin Kamara gets drafted there, I almost don't even care how I viewed him as a prospect. If he's going to be used in that offense, he's going to do well in fantasy. And it just so happened that Alvin Kamara was also incredibly good. So like I've been saying on these shows, I'm trying to find market inefficiencies. I'm trying to find Aaron Joneses. Because that's where you'll find an edge in fantasy football. When everyone is into similar players, you've got to find the ones who are flying under the radar. This next question is from @NoPickPab. And by the way, I'm sorry that my voice sounds the way that it does. I'm fighting off a sinus infection. Anyway, this question says, your thoughts on Daniel Jones? Why is he projected as a first-round pick? So I don't do a ton of quarterback evaluations since the position isn't very important in fantasy. Now, I do some, but I don't trust my process with it like I do at running back and wide receiver. It's also more difficult. And a lot of my quarterback work is done closer to the draft because I'm focusing on wide receiver and running back so much beforehand. But Jim Sonis at NumberFire writes a great piece each year on statistically superior quarterbacks in each draft class. And according to Sonis, Jones ranks 6th within this year's class. So from a numbers-driven standpoint, I couldn't tell you the argument for Jones. This next question is from @Brandon_Kaiser1. Which running backs' fantasy outlooks are most likely to be negatively impacted by the NFL draft? Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, the players who are going to be impacted most are guys who aren't super established runners. A team isn't going to spend a high pick on a running back if they feel good about their current backfield. One obvious player is Damian Williams, though. He did sign a contract extension, and he was effective replacing Kareem Hunt this year. But Spencer Ware's a free agent, so at the very least, the Chiefs need depth. It's a win for Williams if the Chiefs get a running back after day 2, and it's a possibility given that they do have needs outside of running back. But if they get a day 1 or a day 2 back, I would expect that player to shoot up dynasty rookie draft boards. And I think when answering a question like this, you have to just look for teams that have need at the position. So Philadelphia running backs could be negatively impacted, Tampa Bay running backs, Oakland running backs, maybe Baltimore running backs, the Jets, and then Houston's another interesting team that could go after one. Lamar Miller is a free agent next season, and D'Onta Foreman is no lock to be a workhorse for them. So maybe they end up snagging one too. And never count out the Seahawks taking an early round running back because we know how much they love running backs. Guys, it's just a joke. It's just a joke. Please don't take that seriously. So I guess my answer would be Damian Williams and Lamar Miller as the most relevant players, but a lot of teams will be in the market for a running back during the draft. This next question is an email. It says, "Hey JJ, my fantasy league is in a debate over how good the Patriots defense was this year. How did they rank in the expected points model during the regular season and in the playoffs? Any other relevant stats for ranking a defense would help. Thanks, Alex." I think it's hilarious when I get questions like this one, when there's someone having a debate with a friend and somehow I'm the one who's able to settle the debate. But I love it. It's fun. I get in sports debates all the time with my friends, and trust me, I crush their souls. So through the Super Bowl, through every game played by New England, they ranked 9th in defensive efficiency on a per-play basis according to NumberFire's expected points model. And that's adjusted for strength of opponent. Through the end of the regular season, New England was 11th. So they got better in the playoffs, which really is not a surprise. And they got progressively better as the season went on for the most part. After 4 weeks, they were 21st in the league in per-play efficiency on the defensive side of the ball. But after 8 weeks, they jumped to 10th, and they sort of hovered that mark through the rest of the season. I don't know if that helps your debate, but that's what the numbers say. This next question is from @Impressov. Where do you draw the line for diversifying your drafts? I passed on Mahomes in one league last year because I already had him on a different draft. I have icicles on my face where tears used to be. I think the important thing to remember about diversification is that it's much more important in the early rounds. If you're not diversifying early on, it can completely torpedo your teams. Like if you decided that Le'Veon Bell was your 101 and you had 10 drafts and you got a top 2 pick in every single one of those drafts, and then you decided to get Bell in all of them, you were screwed last year. You didn't win. You didn't diversify and it completely ruined you. The opportunity cost is so much greater in the early rounds because you're foregoing that chance to have elite players. In the late rounds, that opportunity cost is nothing. So with Mahomes last year, if you really liked Patrick Mahomes going into the 2018 season, you could easily have gone all in on him. Even if your quarterback pick doesn't pan out, it's not that big of a deal in most leagues. I mean, you've got to play to how your league goes, but that's how you need to think about diversification. Your highest rostered players shouldn't be from the early rounds where opportunity cost is greatest. This next question is from @Sethhead. How much statistically do combine results matter? I know some events correlate better than others, like 3-cone to edge defenders, but is that really a useful predictor? An analyst who's strictly using the combine to make judgments about a player is going to be bad at predicting which prospects are going to be good and bad. That goes for all positions. Now, I can't speak to pretty much any position outside of running back and wide receiver for this question, though, because I only really prospect those two positions. And combine drills, in some, don't really correlate to success for those two positions. But I do think outliers are important to look at. If you've got a wide receiver who is incredibly productive in college and he looks great entering the combine, and he has a height-adjusted speed score that ranks in the 5th percentile, he's going to get knocked down in my rankings. For 2 reasons. The first is because he's probably not very athletic, and that's not good. But the second is because teams care about the combine. Some teams more than others. And if teams care, we should care because it's going to impact where these guys get drafted. I can tell you that how running backs and wide receivers do in drills isn't a huge deal for my particular prospect models. I like getting their measurements though because that's important. And it's interesting to see if there are any outliers. This last question is from @Michael_Dubner. Is drafting best ball leagues now minus EV? Pros: ADP edges, roster construction, not everyone following the news/predicting changes. Cons: incomplete depth chart information, and rookies aren't in all player pools. If you're good at fantasy football, there's never a time that's really minus EV. It's not like your opponents have more information than you do. Like in your cons list, you mention incomplete depth chart information, but everyone has incomplete depth chart information. It's not like one person knows exactly what the depth charts are going to look like in June while someone else doesn't. This is a really good example of understanding how to embrace variance. And really, it's a good example of just embracing the fact that you're going to be wrong. A lot of people drafting this time of year are going to go into those drafts with a lot of confidence, too much confidence. They're going to think they know for a fact that Damian Williams is going to see 250 touches next year. But we don't know that. And if we don't know that, we've got to embrace the fact that we don't know that. What's important is to look at range of outcomes for players. If you believe there's a chance that Damian Williams could end up as a first-round pick in fantasy if things fall his way, and he's being drafted in round 4, then you should acquire Damian Williams shares. But if you think that his ceiling is the late third round if things do go his way, but his ADP is in round 4 right now, then there's not much equity to be gained in drafting Damian Williams. You can still just wait to get Damian Williams after the NFL draft is over, after free agency is over. If you put in the work to think this way, you will have a positive expected value. That's going to do it for today's show. Thanks to all of you guys for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, TuneIn, Stitcher, and Spotify. And as I said earlier this week, I would really appreciate a rating and review on iTunes. It goes a long way to helping this show. And I'm also on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Feel free to follow me on there. And if you've got a question for this mailbag show next week, you can hit me up on there or email me at jj@numberfire.com. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your weekend.